and go.
So, hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 73 of the Frontline Chatter podcast. I am not Jarian Gibson. My name's Sean Massey. I'm the vice chairman of the World of EUC, and I'm stepping in today to be the host of the Frontline Chatter podcast because we are going to do something a little bit different for this episode. And I'd like to introduce you all to my cat, Jockey, who decided that this is a perfect time to make his presence known as we start recording. So today we're going to talk a little bit about careers and career transitions and job hunting, and we've got a great panel lined up for you. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with our first one, Jarian Gibson.
So hi, Jarian Gibson here, kind of changing roles today with the podcast here. I'm one of the panelists today for this discussion. I currently work for Nutanix, have been there for almost 9 years now. I've kind of gone through the different roles over my career, from help desk to admins on the customer side to consultant with 2 VARs to independent consultant, and now to a technology partner. So happy to be here today and share some insights.
Right. Yeah, and Jarian, you've been across the board, so I look forward to kind of hearing a lot more about your journey. But joining you, we also have 2 other people who have had some really exciting and interesting career journeys. Lee, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, glad to be here. Lee Winbush. I have been in IT for almost 30 years. Started out kind of working in some smaller companies, but was fortunate to land at some Fortune 500s and spent a number of years at Target and 3M and most recently MassMutual. Kind of grew up from kind of help desk support, desktop support, sysadmin, the Citrix guy. We kind of became the Citrix guy at a number of companies. Most recently at MassMutual, I was their head of end user computing. And then at the end of last year, I decided to start my own fractional CTO practice. So I am an independent, like Jarian has been in the past. And I'm also a one-time educator as well. So I went to become an adjunct professor at my business school. So we can talk about that.
And you mentioned the fractional CTO part. I'd love to hear more about that as we kind of go through the conversation, because I think there's a lot of interesting insights our listeners will have around starting your own business, building your client base, and how that fractional executive thing works. So finally, our last panelist today is Todd. Todd, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hey, my name's Todd Smith, and I'm recently moved over from Citrix to iGel, where I'm now the director of North America pre-sales for pretty much every vertical except for healthcare. So working closely with a variety of different customers in the enterprise space, as well as the public sector space in the US and Canada. Like I said, I was prior with Citrix for 19 years and doing a variety of different roles, but it's always been around typical sales engineering, product evangelism, bringing products out to the market and convincing customers that, hey, we can help solve some problems. And I think the background there is listening and coming up with good answers and good solutions based on what I hear from customers and partners and things like that. Wasn't always an SE. Look at myself as an accidental SE, because back in my day as a customer, SEs were the guys that walked on water and would descend into my business and basically explain things that I needed to know that was relevant and worthwhile. Without going in and giving me a sales pitch all the time. So SEs were really if you look at the think of an SE as being part of a sales team that's considered a bicycle, right? The front tire has to be about the same size as the rear tire. And, the sales rep has just as much responsibility as the engineer. And it really needs to be in balance for that to work. So a variety of different roles in my past, but would love to take some time today and share some of that journey.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Todd. And there's one thing you said that kind of stood out to me when you were introducing your background, you spent 19 years at one company, which I think today is something to be, it is really impressive because, as Jarian and Lee were talking about their experience, and I look at my own experience, I can't imagine being in one place for 19 years, right? It's really hard for me to think about that. And you did that, and you rose through the ranks and got to where you wanted to be before, jumping to another role. So that's really impressive. And, I think we should come back to that point and talk about, how you set your career up in a way to enable that sort of journey.
Yeah.
So, we've talked a little bit about your basic career journeys. And Todd, I'm going to come back to you since we kind of, started with Jarian, and as I look at my screen here, it's, left to right. So we'll go right to left this time. And I think this is actually a really good transition point off of the, the long career in one company. Yeah. What were the biggest challenges you found in your job transition and in moving from Citrix to iGel and making those changes?
Yeah, so it was an interesting time. Back in December, there was some restructuring that happened, and I got an opportunity to part ways with Citrix. And of course, it couldn't have happened at kind of a worse time on a calendar. It was end of year. For a lot of organizations, it was the holiday time, the holiday season, and all that stuff. And there wasn't a lot of activity, so it wasn't really a huge rush to get out there. During the transition, I was leveraging my network, reached out to folks via a LinkedIn post saying, "Hey, you know what? Here's the situation. After 19 years, I'm leaving Citrix, looking for the next opportunity." Got probably 1,000 or so responses to that post, and about 200 or so direct messages coming in from friends and coworkers and things like that. And it kind of opened up a lot of opportunity to have really good discussions with folks that I hadn't really talked to in a while, or catching up with what's going on in the industry, what's going on with some of the challenges. And lo and behold, I get a text message on a Friday night saying, "Hey, we really want to talk to you." And Monday, I'm getting a phone call from the talent acquisition person at iGel. And I think probably 2 weeks later, I was getting an offer letter. So things move pretty quick, but it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the network that I was able to leverage and build over that period of time in the industry. And 19 years at Citrix was, I don't look at it as I did the same job for 19 years. I did a variety of different things. I had exposure to a lot of different organizations. I came in through the Ardent's acquisition, which was provisioning services, which interacted with a lot of the traditional Citrix folks, but gave me interactions with Microsoft and with VMware, with a variety of other hardware manufacturers. And then being on the team that brought Zen Desktop to the marketplace, right? So that was the first real foray into virtual desktops, which then converted over towards EUC, right? And each one of those was building up a market and working with the product teams to get the messaging right, and then working with customers to solve their problems, because nobody wants to buy shelfware anymore. Mm-hmm. And it kind of morphed from there. And then I got an opportunity to move into more of a management role, and still maintain relationships with folks through a variety of different industries, right? Healthcare, education, financial services, and public sector. And once again, building up those relationships and being able to leverage those really helped me get through this transition of one job to another.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask one more thing off of that, because you mentioned, right, at Citrix, you didn't do just one job. You had kind of moved around. What's it like for people who aren't in the vendor space to transition internally, even from like an SE type role to like a product type role to a manager role? What are the challenges that someone could run into there?
I think the biggest challenge to overcome is the fear of asking questions.
Mhm.
And also asking for help from other people who have been in the role before. And, I used to play the new guy card an awful lot, or asking them why we're doing it this way, why asking someone why the development cycle does this, or why we're positioning a product to this specific market. And then also, bringing up ideas around something different. Sometimes, especially in the vendor side, you get locked into either a specific process, and sometimes you have to be that challenger. And I think that was one thing that really kind of helped me along my career, has been, we talk about the challenger salesperson, we talk about the challenging customer, we talk about, sometimes you have to be an internal challenger in that terms as well.
Cool. And I really like the way you framed that, right? Being an internal challenger. So I want to take the same question to you, Lee, about, what were the biggest challenges you've seen as you've transitioned through multiple customer roles and now into, putting out your own sign and being your own boss. Tell us about some of the challenges you've seen as you've made those transitions, especially now to being independent.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The longest I think I've ever been at a company, actually, yes, was 3M. I was there for 10 years. Prior to that, Target 6, and then everywhere else 4 or less. So I definitely it was kind of the opposite, I guess, of Todd's experience. But I think the challenges there are really just kind of learning I'll take two pieces. One, from I think one large company to another, it's learning the culture. So one of the things that I've noticed as an IT pro and eventually moved into management, where I've been the last many years, I'd say 80% of what we do is kind of common. It's really just understanding that 20%. So moving from retail to manufacturing, well, you've got a whole different set of lingo that you need to understand. Although it can actually come in and help you. When I worked with 3M's consumer business group, I could turn on my Target hat and my marketing hat and I go, oh, okay, I remember what it's like to sell into consumer products. So I think learning the culture and those distinctions is important, and doing that quickly. And I loved what Todd said, like ask questions, like be comfortable asking the dumb question, quote unquote, and you can just accelerate your learning. Pivoting from big companies to being on your own, well, that's a much larger, much more than a 20% change, because of course now you don't have that steady paycheck coming in that you had previously. And it's really everything kind of depends on you to get the flywheel started of your business. And I think that, much like Todd mentioned, having a powerful network is key. And I've had a great network, and I've had the opportunity to have lots of amazing conversations, and just putting myself out there, not as a salesperson, but just having all these conversations with folks, telling them what I'm up to. And people just want to help you. They want to connect you with people that can help accelerate your business. And so I've had some really great conversations and some potential clients to work with. And so massive change, but I think it's tapping into your network. It's kind of putting yourself out there, share your wisdom, give a little bit away, on LinkedIn. I've been trying to share some of my wisdom through LinkedIn posts during the week, but I think those are some of the challenges that I faced in those two distinct scenarios of moving between company to company versus moving from kind of corporate America to being a solopreneur.
Yeah. Okay. And, the thing you said about, giving a little bit away. I remember, I can't remember if it was on Twitter or Blue Sky or where it was, but Corey Quinn, Quinny Pig, had posted something similar to that a while back, where a company had wanted him to pay him to go sit in their Slack channel and just answer questions occasionally. And he's like, well, let's do that for free just to see how this works out. And then a couple months later, they were able to actually go back and negotiate like a higher rate and figure out how he actually fit into what they were really looking for. So, there's a lot of good that could come from even just giving a little bit of your time to others from what I've heard and seen. So Jarian, I think you have the most varied journey of everyone, right? You've been a customer, you've been a consultant, you've worked for a vendor. How have those transitions been for you, and what have you taken away from it?
Yeah, I think there some of the biggest thing is mindset changes, because going from an admin where you're in the same environment every day, you 100% know the environment, you've implemented stuff, you're long-term supporting that stuff, to going to a consultant role where you don't know the environment. You have, you may have done like the pre-sales part of it, you may have not, but you have that statement of work. You got to understand that environment quickly, and then be able to deploy that, but also leave them with the knowledge to support that, or to be able to continue to run that environment. So, and then you're on to the next one. So that mindset right there was the biggest change for me, was going from the customer side to the consultant side. Especially being that young in my career there, because I was in my early 20s just starting out when I got into consulting. The other thing too is just the culture in some of the consulting companies, some of the VARs, making sure that you're a fit, they're a fit, those type of things. You kind of don't want to go into a situation to where it's like, people hoard knowledge. They don't want to help new people. They don't want to bring others up. And so that might not, I can't talk. That may not be the right fit for someone like that. Maybe you like helping others. Maybe you like seeing you in mentoring roles. You don't just want to be an island of knowledge and, being the guy, because I've seen people like that in those roles and they get burnt out, right? Because they have no other time to do other things, because they're always put in situations because they know that the guys are like, you got to go here, you got to go here, that kind of stuff. So that mindset change, and then it's making sure the culture fit was a good one. I was lucky in the second part of working at a VAR, because I worked for 2 in my career, that it was a very good culture fit. They did those things like want you to help others grow, allowed you to do things to kind of not only help yourself grow, but help the company grow. And, they had some skin in the game with it as well, to incentivize you for that also. So, that type of thing there. I think the biggest transition was making those connections, wondering where the work is going to come from. And then you got to sell yourself a whole lot more, out there to get that. Luckily, from working with a VAR and then knowing people at other VARs, I was able to make connections to kind of have some upfront work to where it wasn't that big of a challenge. But there's still those lulls of work where you still want to make sure that you have things covered, not only from a financial standpoint, but you got to think about insurance. You got to think about all those different things that come with it when you're on your own as well. And then going from consulting into working for a technology partner is a little bit different too as well, because I came in with that consultant role, and I don't think that consultant vibe ever leaves you. And so, even though I do a lot of work on the back end doing solutions engineering stuff today, I'm still working with customers, which helps, but and you want to always jump in and help it and do things, but you gotta, kind of stay back just enough to where you're not overstepping, or you're making sure that you're staying within the bounds of your role, and not trying to get back into that full-time consulting piece. So I think for me, it was the mindset change out of those roles. And then even within where I'm at now with Nutanix, I've helped cover some other roles as well. So, dabbing in and out of my main role, but also helping covering other roles also, is a different mindset as well, because you're kind of going into, different ways of doing things, like, for example, solutions engineering, testing things, breaking things, being hands-on, making sure all the things are working, to possibly putting a PM hat on where it's more of the bigger picture. It's more of working with different partners, making sure timelines and features and roadmap and that kind of stuff is happening, not only within Nutanix, but also with vendors that we work with as well. So I think, again, all that's back to mindset change is the biggest thing for me.
Okay. And yeah, I would, in my own experience, jumping from consultant to working for a vendor, mindset change was a big part of it. I can relate to that from experience. So yeah. So Lee, I want to go back to something you talked about, and I know you and Todd and Jarian all kind of talked about your network, but there was something interesting I think you said, where it was like, you're talking to your network, you're catching up with people, and people want you to succeed. And so how have you leveraged your network in that way to, to build up your business, and find those leads to make the independent, your new independent role a success?
Yeah, I mean, it's really simpler than maybe it sounds. I mean, maybe it sounds a little scary to say, "Hey, I'm going to go sell myself." I mean, you kind of are, of course, but the way that I think about it is, I'm just having conversations with people, and so I take a lot of the expectation from the conversation away, and just say, "Hey, this is somebody that I know. This is somebody, right now I'm just really going through again my network of folks that I've either worked with before or have been friends with, and so." I'm just catching up basically with someone. In some cases, I've caught up with people I haven't talked to in years. In other cases, it's been people I've just haven't talked to in a few months. But just going into those conversations, catching up with them, seeing if there's any way that I can genuinely help connect them as well to anything they're looking for. And I've been able to do that a couple times. And then just sharing with them what I'm up to. And really just asking for, hey, is there anybody else you think I should talk to? And that kind of opens that door to, maybe they have needs for my services, from a technical leadership perspective, or in what's generally been happening is, hey, I don't have any needs, but I can think of somebody else that you should talk to. Now, maybe it's not necessarily, again, someone who's going to be a client, but it might be another person who connects me to another person. And that's kind of how it's gone. Is kind of a few different connections, and then have some really great conversations. And that's opened the door to a few opportunities that I'm chasing down right now, just having started in the last few months. So that's kind of how I go into it, is really just genuinely interested in the other person and kind of what are they up to and what are they doing, telling them what I'm kind of up to, and really kind of going in again with no sales expectation. It's just two humans getting together, connecting, sharing dreams. And what I found is, just when I just share like that, kind of share what I'm up to, share my dreams, share my aspirations, and how I'm hoping to help companies in my business, they just want to help me. They just want to help me succeed. And so that's been really neat.
So, and I like the way you kind of phrase that, right? It's not going in with sales expectations, just connecting them with as a person. But then, because when VMware got bought by Broadcom, I decided that was a good time to step out for a little bit and take a break from the workforce. And in theory, I've kind of started up my own independent thing. My wife says I'm semi-retired now. Because I spend more time doing the stay-at-home dad thing and being a scout leader and things like that. But, it is scary in a way to think about it. Like, when you think about it, right? Like to think about going in front of people and putting on that sales hat when you're more of a technical person. At least for me, I find that scary, like putting myself out there in that way. Even though I have a lot potentially that I could share to some people and things like that, it's still scary to just have that conversation on even a person-to-person level with people, because for me, at least in the back of my mind, I'm not just going to catch up with you. I'm hoping that I can turn this into something for me. And so just even, I like hearing how you phrase that, because it's like, that's something like I'm thinking about now, how I just apply that without that expectation of getting something out of it. Now, to the same effect, Todd, I want to come back to you, because you said, like, when you stepped away from Citrix back in December, you had put a LinkedIn post out there, and you had thousands of reactions, bunch of direct messages, and really quick follow-up on that. So was there anything specifically you did when you left, to anything you said or had posted to your network that helped find the role that you're in now? Or was it just kind of, hey, I'm looking for something, and it just kind of appeared?
So I think with my situation, it was more, I had a couple of customers or a couple of companies that I was talking to, and the IGL opportunity came up very quickly, right? But one of the things that I set my mind to do during this was to really kind of focus on gaining some additional skills, rekindling some of the relationships that I had with folks, and really kind of talking through a lot of what my next step wanted to be. I knew I wanted to stay in the technology space, and I wanted something in some type of pre-sales engineering leadership type of role. It could have been consulting, it could have been working for a vendor, it could have been working for a VAR. I was talking with multiple companies that were in each of those categories. And I think one of the things that I look at and say, what would I have done if I didn't land at iJob, right? So what was my second option? And probably going down the consulting path would have been my next option, right? Either as a fractional IT leader, similar to what Lee's doing, or as a very specific, focused technology type of, whether it be implementation or whether it be some type of design or doing some type of strategy type of work. Each one of those type of focus areas could have really been beneficial for me to go down. And I looked at, if you look at what are the keys to going down the consulting path, right? You need to be curious all the time. You also need to be humble. And you also need to be very quick to take what you've learned and be able to regurgitate that to a customer or to your consulting client. So there's a variety of different things there that would have done. And I faced this a couple of times in my career where, I was working for an IT outsourcing company back in the Y2K days. Well, guess what? January of 2000, the company I was working for as an in-house IT director, they lost almost 60% of their business overnight, right? What do you do when you're going from helping people get their COBOL programs up to speed, and then all of a sudden you've got this brand new world, right? So we looked at, the company was looking at total IT outsourcing instead of just focusing on the application side. So I was an outsourced CTO for a while, for a year and a half at a customer up in Vermont. So, I became their CTO as they were doing their outsourcing piece of it. And, prior to that, I had worked for a little VAR, doing Novell work. And prior to that, I was in financial services, running an IT shop, running the technical side of an IT shop. And I started there as a programmer. Realized I didn't want to be a programmer. That was like 6 months in, and I was like, I don't want to look for something else. Luckily, every single company that I've worked for, being open and honest about, hey, you know what? I think I'm the right fit for the company. I may not be the right fit for the job. I really want to stay here, but I want to do something slightly different. So, hey, put your hand up when they say, we've got a new project that we need to have staffing for. Is anyone interested? The worst thing someone can say is no, you're not the right fit for it. But the benefit is not having to look back and say, if I had only raised my hand that one time, I could have had a different position.
So I want to ask you something about that, since you mentioned like you had started as a programmer, you realized you didn't want to do that.
Yep.
One thing I think a lot of people struggle with, and I don't know if it's just IT or in general, is, being open with their manager about where they want to take their career. And when you were in that role in IT, were you open with your manager about like, hey, this isn't right for me, but I really like this company. What can we do? Or was it just kind of grit and, grind through it until those opportunities to raise your hand came up? And how has, that experience shaped how you, took your career as you went to other places, especially like Citrix, where you were for 19 years? I know that's a lot of questions, but.
Yeah. So if I look at it, the financial services gig kind of fell into my lap. It was responding to an ad that was in the classified section of the Boston Globe, right? Back when they had classified ads and they had job openings that was the, it was old school Indeed or Monster, right? So I applied for a job there. I knew how to code in Pascal, and I had taken some other, coding lessons. I mean, that was my background. I was a computer science major, and leveraged that to get my foot in the door, right? So got in there, and the reason why I got hired is because the guy who wrote the sales program, his wife was about to have a baby, and they needed someone to understand how to keep the wheels moving on keep the engine going on this sales information system that we were able to build. We built it internally, and understanding how coding worked and understanding how the basics were there. Luckily, we kept everything going, and then they did a corporate restructuring of the entire MIS department back in the day when you had MIS and you had the data center operations team. They kind of merged those together, and they brought in some developers and coders. and things like that. And they said, who wants to handle the operations side of it? And I raised my hand and said, yeah, that would be cool. And lo and behold, 6 years later, I was still at that company, and I had taken on additional operational roles, right? So it wasn't just IT, it was doing some of the processing operations as well in financial services. That was every day you had to basically clean the books and make sure all the transactions processed the right way. So I learned an awful lot about process controls and a lot about the compliance programs that were out there and things like that. And that led me to, and at the same time, I was doing a lot of Novell work. So I went to go work for a Novell VAR for a couple of years, which was interesting because that opened up a whole bunch of other different customers' environments, right? So they were, everything from a 5-person environment to well over 1,000. And getting that exposure to a bunch of different environments, and I think Jarian said this as well, is it really kind of lets you build up your skill sets and your experience very quickly being a consultant, right? And then also being able to then take that to your next role, right? So after the VAR, got a chance to go, I literally went into a customer that they were having some networking problems and found out that the wiring was all messed up. Gave them a quote on what they needed to do that, and met the person who eventually became my boss. And then he in turn has hired me 2 other times, because not only was a boss, he was a mentor, friend. My son was born. Rue was one of the first people that came to the hospital to see my youngest son, right? You develop relationships, right? And I think this is the critical thing. It's the relationships that you develop and you nurture, and then you leverage when you need it. But then once you've leveraged that, you need to find ways to give it back to others, right? So if someone helps you find a job, you owe it to someone else. It may not be that person that helped you find a job. It may be someone else that may need a helping hand, or may need a referral, or, hey, let me check your resume for you, or let me introduce you to a couple of folks. You don't have to hire them, but if you can help them progress their career, be a mentor, be a friend. Love the fact that Lee went down the path of doing some education and things like that. That's the one thing that really people need to understand is this is still a human dominated business, right? You need to have that person, those people skills, right? And be a servant leader, be helpful. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to offer answers. So there's a variety of different things there that it probably just spoke way too long on something that you expected to have a very simple question or answer to. But yeah, it's been quite a journey.
To add on to what Todd was saying is, like, relationships also don't burn bridges, right?
Right.
You may, just like you said, you may not be a fit. You have that self-awareness to say, hey, this is not for me, but I still want to be here. Or it's like, I kind of want to go venture out and, see what's out there. But sometimes you go back to previous employers. So you never want to burn a bridge, always leave on good terms, always, keep things, on the level, and don't do anything to set yourself up to where you can't go back, or you have a reputation in the industry, because it is a small community, right? Yes, it's worldwide, but word does travel. People know, other people out there. And so you don't want to have that to where you have a reputation where you're unhireable, or you're not easy to work with, or, that kind of things. Cause then you're really setting yourself for failure at that point.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe even to add on to that, Jarian, what you said is, I had a mentor that would tell me, look left, look right, be nice, because you just never know when you might work with that person, they might hire you, etc. And it extends even more so as you get into entrepreneurship and running your own business. I guess I shouldn't say surprised, but how many partnerships or clients are found through relationships, right? And so these people that I reached out to and are happy to help me, we've had good interactions in the past, right? I've always been a good, actor in the space. I've tried to always be supportive and be helpful of others, and just be a diligent worker, right? Just be a diligent, whether it's a technical worker or managing my staff. So that now maybe, let's say I go into business with somebody, it's like, oh yeah, I remember Lee was, always really diligent, did a great job, presented well, whatever it was. So yeah, definitely cultivate those relationships and just always just be a good human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I really like the point too about paying it forward.
Yep.
Because it's not just paying back to the people who helped get where you are, but also making sure that when you get where you are, the door doesn't close behind you. And with all the constant change in our industry, you never know when you're going to find somebody who is just like you, who just needs that step up, even if it's not into a role you can directly help them with, but just making that introduction. And I think that's key, because there's been people who I had a former manager who at one point, I had moved, well, at the time he wasn't my manager, but he was kind of like the senior person in that department. I had moved on to a couple of other roles. Then he became the manager, had an open headcount to backfill him. And within, a couple of weeks, I had a new job because of that relationship and those connections. And then taking what he did for me and then helping somebody else by being a reference for them and mentoring them and those sorts of things, it pays off. And you get to watch as those people's career go in interesting and new directions.
And so, Sean, real quickly, the mentoring opportunities are out there. There is such a need for people in the technology space and the business space to go and talk to young kids, especially the high school level kids. It kind of goes back to your reference about being a Boy Scout leader.
Yep.
Right. Using that as a mentoring opportunity, giving someone like that. I go and talk to a summer camp, the counselors every single summer to go, it's a half hour. It's a half day for me to go and spend time with these kids. And one of the things I always talk to them about is, how do you explain to a future employer what you do as a summer camp counselor? And it's a sleepaway camp, right? Parents drop their kids off and they come back 3 weeks later to pick them up. You as a counselor, you are responsible for another person's child for 3 weeks. What bigger height of responsibility do you get as a high school junior, senior, early college person, right? Mm-hmm. That's a lot of responsibility. And here's how you can spin that. And here's how you can have that conversation with future employers, college admissions officers, right? It's not just, hey, you know what? I cleaned up the beach every day, or I, picked up golf balls on the driving range type of thing. This is responsibility for another human life. And the same thing goes with, there's other things you can do to help mentor the next generation.
And just to build off that for one quick point, I'm the host and I'm going to derail this podcast here for a second. Not only are there opportunities, in your community, but I think as a tech community, we tend to congregate in places online, right? Whether that's a Twitter or a Blue Sky or LinkedIn or even like a Reddit. And one of the places I've been active on Reddit is r/IT career questions, where there's a lot of people who are high schoolers in college, just recently graduated, trying to figure out how to get a job and where to take their career and what they need to do to advance. And having, a breadth of experience allows me to go in and say, here's the things to think about. Here's what you should be thinking about, or, really sometimes just answering their questions with other questions to help get them to make the decision that they feel is best for them. So, and even if those are like one-off point in time relationships where it's just even answering a question for somebody is still beneficial for them in some ways, I think. So I do want to change tracks here for a second and talk about something else that's really important for any professional, but especially in IT, where I think there's the expectations of like IT hero syndrome, where one person does it all. And that's work-life balance. And these transitions from one job to another or one company to another often can upset that balance. The big changes can upset things, especially with your family. So how are you managing work-life balance as you take on these new roles and transition through careers? Jarian, I'm going to start with you since we've kind of made it all the way back down to the end.
I think the biggest thing starts with communication, not only communication at home, but communication as you transition into that new role, because that new role could come with different responsibilities, different working hours, and so forth. So understanding what the expectations are, but also to understanding what obligations you also have in, outside of work as well. Like, you're a scout leader, Sean, for example, you may, I used to coach my son's and daughter's soccer team. So, having those expectations of that family life, but also with the work schedule, and to see what can be done to work around that, because you always, especially if you have kids at home, you always want to be there for them. You don't want to be just the person that's there occasionally. You always want to be present. So understanding, that schedule, understanding the expectations of the role, having that communication, those are the things that have really worked for me over my career, as I've gone through different roles or just within, being longer at some roles.
All right. Lee, how have you managed the work-life balance, especially transitioning into now an independent?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've, as an independent, you kind of own your schedule a little bit more. But when I think back to most of my time in corporate, I had a mentor in business school that gave me this advice, which was not to really, I'll be a little contrarian here, not to really think about work-life balance as something to balance against, but instead think about work-life integration. So how are you acquiring skills maybe in your work domain or in your social domain, and that you could apply to your family domain or maybe like in your church? So a prime example, I had picked up some Lean Six Sigma and program management and change management skills at 3M. I applied those to my church because they needed to do an addition and a renovation of the building, right? Things like that. And then when it comes to family, it's the same thing. I really have always prioritized my family as part of that integration, and know that at the end of the day, like another great mentor that would say, when you're at the end of your life on your deathbed, who's going to come to you? Now, I guess, Todd, you're lucky. You had your boss came to your birth of your child, right? That's amazing. But in most cases, like at the end of your life, it's going to be your family. It's going to be your kids' kids. And so sewing into them and knowing that priority, I think, Jarian, like you said, is that will help you set your priorities. So you can know, like, yeah, I know I need to be at this work thing, but you know what? My kid's got a basketball game. They've got a football game. They've got a recital. That's the priority. That's what I have to do. So I think that's where that work-life integration comes in. And then how can you work with if you're working for other people, how can you work with your other coworkers to kind of balance that out and help them, and they can help you? And if you're on your own, then you really have control. You really have to work with your clients to say, hey, this is what's important to me. This is when I'm available. This is when I'm not. And that's kind of, I think, how you think about it.
Yeah. And, the work-life integration thing is something I've heard before too, where it's like, they're not two separate facets of your life, but they really are two things that go together, and you're not work shouldn't be competing with family and vice versa, is the way it's always been put with me. There are going to be times where there's trade-offs, but in the end, right? Like, your work is supporting your family, and well, in most cases, we hope our family is supporting us in our work. So
just to add on that real quick too, I think, and I don't go to Todd here next, but company culture also does play in that too, as well, as you're looking at different roles and understanding the company culture, because some company cultures are very work-life integrated aware. They fully support that. They also do things to include family in certain events and that kind of stuff too. So don't overlook company culture as you're looking at that work-life integration.
Yeah. And Todd, I promise we are not going to forget you. We're going to come back here in a second, but that is something I think, as you're looking at transitions, you should be asking about in interviews is, right, what is the culture? What is the expectations? And so, Todd, we're going to throw this question to you, but I kind of want to start with that part about identifying company culture, because you've been the one who's been through the interview process most recently. So how did, work-life balance, work-life integration, and company culture, play out as you were interviewing for your new roles? Like, how did that play into it?
Yeah, so I think and this is a really great topic as well, because you've got to look at how the balance works or how the integration works, right? A lot of us have the ability to kind of own our own schedule, right? We're not school teachers. We're expected to be on a specific location for a day. We're not shift workers. We're not always structured, right? But we're also in positions where we have to respond to customer needs or client requests or outages. The pager goes off at 2:00 in the morning and you have 30 minutes to get into the data center to go fix something. I lived that life before, and it's not always fun, but that was part of the job. And that was part of the role. The piece where it really had a balance was, hey, if you're on a support call or if you're on one of these things and you're going beyond normal working hours, how does the company treat that? How do you get comp time? Do you get the flexibility in your schedule where you don't have to take a day off to have a doctor's appointment? You can just step out for a couple of hours. You can go see your granddaughter's recital. You can go do a variety of different things without having to punch the time clock type of scenario. I was looking for that. I was looking for an organization that is not completely strict, where you have to go and follow. You have to punch in at 8:00 and you can't leave until 5:00 and you get a half-hour lunch, things like that. Also being able to have that flexibility, also being able to work for a company that cares about things like, hey, you know what? The benefits nowadays matter. And it's not just about the pricing component of the benefits. It's, do they have a variety of programs for, maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption leave, all those different things that are critical nowadays. I think one thing that really kind of gets a lot of people is the unlimited PTO kind of programs that are out there. Unlimited PTO does not mean you can take the entire year off. It means you have to use it within your own guidelines, and company needs to still approve some things, but you can't just go and say, hey, I'm going to trek the Himalayas for 3 months and be gone. But working for a company that does say, hey, if you need to take some time off, or you need to take sporadic time off because it's not your schedule that you need to take that time off, I think that's critical nowadays as well. But look for a culture where they appreciate not only you as an employee, but also your supporting organization at home, your kids, your spouse, your extended family. Because one of the things that I had to face early in my sales career in sales engineering was, hey, yeah, dad was going to a Celtics game, or he was going to here, or he was going to go out for dinner every once in a while, and things like that. Dude, that was the fun part of the job. The not so fun part was getting up at 5:00 in the morning to jump on a plane to fly for 3 hours and then go directly to 8 hours worth of work, and then having a Subway sandwich at 9:00 at night because that's you hadn't eaten since breakfast type of thing. That's there's good parts of what we do and there's bad parts of what we do. Don't get caught up in the glitz, but also realize that it's not always bad. But that kind of goes in with that work-life integration, work-life balance type of scenario. Right? So ask those questions up front. Hey, if you're going on the interview process, talk to the folks that you're going to be peers with, if it's possible. Talk to, look at some of the resources online about, company reviews and things like that. Take it with a grain of salt unless you're hearing it directly from the actual employees themselves, right? So there's a lot of things to take into account to build into culture in company culture.
Yeah, and there's two things you brought up there that I just want to go back and touch on, because you had talked about like the aspect of it of like getting up at 5 a.m. to get on a plane and travel somewhere. It's like that travel sometimes comes out of nowhere. Like you can't like always plan for it. And like the role I had when I was at VMware was not like a frontline SE, but kind of like an overlay role. So we had a little bit more like control of when we scheduled that travel, but it was still sometimes like 2-3 weeks out, and you're shuffling things around to make things fit for your family, or pushing back on the customer going, oh, we can't be there for whatever reason. Yep. But then a lot of people think business travel is glamorous, and it's not. I don't think people realize just how much work it is to get on a plane and fly everywhere. And unless you're that, like senior director, VP level, you're not getting business class. You're not getting first class unless you've racked up the status. You're not getting suites everywhere you go. It's like, yeah, you get to go to some of these places, but do you really get to go there? Like, are you actually I had a boss at VMware who's like, you're in Sweden, like take a day. It's the extra hotel night's actually going to save us money on airfare. Take a day and see the city while you're there, because otherwise we're paying like $900 more to fly you back when you're done, as opposed to $150 for the hotel room. Yep. Right. Which is one of those other things you learn as you travel. It's like trying to get good airfare sucks, like to fit within a budget. But there was one other thing you had talked about, Todd, like when you're in your interview process, talk to the people who you're going to be working with, and talk to the peers, ask about work-life balance. And I know, like, after leaving VMware, I had a couple of interviews where that was one of my key questions of peers or people on the team is, what does work-life balance look like? And there was at least 2 or 3 instances where they told me what it was, and I noped right out. It's like, yeah, thanks for the time. This isn't the right fit for me. Best of luck in your next role. Like, you can't be afraid to, unless you like have like, you need the job to, make the rent and you keep food on the table. You don't always have to continue with a process if it's not going to fit that work-life integration aspect.
Well, I have a question about that, I guess. I mean, it's a balance, right? If you're coming into the interview process, and I've obviously changed companies quite a few times, I don't know, it's not fair, but I feel like there's sometimes red flag questions. Yeah. So is sometimes work-life balance a red flag question? Are there other ways that you can kind of suss out, what the culture is like without saying that? Or do you guys think, nope, you should just ask it straight up that way?
I would ask it straight up that way. You can kind of sugarcoat it, a little bit too, but I would just ask it straight up and kind of talk to others as well. I found that's been the best path for me in my experience. Also too, if before going into the interview, if others that work there that you are friendly with as well, just kind of get their heads up and kind of see what they tell you before going in, because that can also help you as you're thinking through the interview and what kind of questions you want to ask as you're having that conversation.
Yeah. And to kind of build off that, right. Like you could go look at sites like Glassdoor and, LinkedIn reviews of companies, but realize that oftentimes there's 2 types of things you're going to see in those. The people who really had a bad experience, and so they're complaining, because usually that's the only time people will say something is when it's a bad experience, or the companies that are incentivizing people to go post 5-star reviews on Glassdoor and LinkedIn because they want to attract talent. And how true those reviews are, if you have like all 5-star reviews except for a couple of 1 or 2 stars, it's like, how true is that? How trustworthy is it? Right.
It's like it's like looking at the reviews of a restaurant or a service provider someplace out there, right? You want to you don't always look at all the 5 stars. You look at a couple of the ones and then pick a couple in the middle to kind of gauge that. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid in the interview process to talk to current employees.
Yeah. And the other piece I would say is sometimes company culture really depends on your direct manager, right? Because we've all been in large organizations where you may have a manager who doesn't believe in work-life balance or work-life integration, or that unlimited PTO is something that they're going to distribute as they feel necessary. And there's others in the organization who are very laissez-faire. And it's like, hey, you're getting your job done, do what you need. Let me know how I can help you.
Yep.
And somewhere in between. And like, I've had friends who I've worked with at VMware, and our experiences were completely different because of who the managers were and where in the organization we sat. And it led to us processing our experiences completely differently.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, the old adage is people don't leave jobs, they leave bad managers.
Mhm.
And that's almost always true. And, you know, as a former manager and as a current manager, that's the number one thing is, right, I want to retain the great people, and I want to make sure they're telling their friends when I have job openings, they want to get them to come join. You don't want to be stuck, labeled as a toxic manager or toxic leader.
So, it's hard to believe we've been at this for almost an hour already. So, just to kind of wrap this up, is there any advice or tips or resources that you can all share for our listeners or viewers who are considering a career transition or who are in the process of one right now? Lee, I'm going to start with you on this one. Any tips, advice, or resources?
Yeah, I would say for advice, keep a really open mind. I mean, when I came into 3M, I left Target because I was looking for some leadership opportunities, wanted to stay in technology, and leveraged my Citrix background to come in as a team lead. And I never really thought about going into manufacturing, but I had an open mind. And then I was tapped for a number of different roles inside the organization. I was tapped to do mergers and acquisitions. I was tapped to learn Lean Six Sigma. So I kind of moved away from the true technical leadership space into these other kind of areas to eventually come back and lead end user computing at MassMutual. So be really open-minded. And then, of course, when I thought about what do I want to do post MassMutual, I mean, a fractional wasn't quite my first thought. I kind of got there through some iterations, but just kept a really, really open mind. And then just ask lots of questions. Talk to people that do different things, very different things, and just see what kind of sparks your interest. And whatever you talk about with like a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, you can drill into that. Whatever that is, you just lit up with, and you were telling the person you're talking to, you got excited, your heart rate's up. Okay, drill into that a little bit. What is that?
So before I move on to Todd and Jarian, I remember at the beginning, I said I wanted to come back and ask you about fractional CTO. And so before we end and before I move on, can you just explain to everybody what that means for people who aren't familiar with what it is to be a fractional executive?
Yeah, just briefly. So I kind of consider it a win-win. A fractional CTO is basically somebody who they own the technology, strategy, and leadership for a company, typically small business, mid-market business, usually, 20, 30 to a couple $100 million, where they're small enough where they don't quite maybe have either the complexity or the budget for a full-time CTO, where they could pay that kind of full salary and benefits and stock and deferred comp and all the things that a experienced Fortune 500 executive might want. So you can pay a fraction of the price, get some really good solid experience, and that could tremendously advance that company beyond what they could have otherwise afforded. And for the fractional executive, it's a win for them because now they get to work with multiple clients, and so maybe that just satisfies their kind of interest in doing different things and seeing different scenarios and solving different problems and gaining new skills through that process. But also they have a diversity of income. So now I've got maybe 4 or 5 monthly retainers across multiple clients. And if I lose one client, it's okay. I lose a piece of my income. I'll just have to continue to do business development to backfill it. Whereas if I have a full-time job, if I lose my one job, I lose 100% of my income. So that's kind of what fractional is in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. And thanks for sharing that explanation, because
Yes,
I think there's a few people who have never heard that term. So since we're talking about careers and career transitions, just wanted to get that in before we wrapped it up. So now going back to advice, tips, tricks, resources, Todd, if you'd like to share some.
Sure. So number one is keep your options open and keep an open mind. Always keep learning and keep asking questions, right? And then the other piece of it is in this day and age, you have to be very patient, especially if you're looking for something very specific. But there are roles out there for almost everyone who's looking for jobs or looking to transition to something else. Leverage your network and leverage mentors and ask questions. And I think that's probably the best advice I can probably give on this one.
Okay. Jarian?
Look for roles and opportunities to where you can definitely grow. And I say that is you don't never want to be the smartest person in the room. You may be smarter at one thing than someone else, but they may be smarter than you in one thing, that you're not. So you can kind of grow and bounce off each other. You always want to be learning. So that's the one thing I would say there. The other one I would say is, put yourself out there and do things, reach out to others. I found a lot of opportunities I've had have been through, community programs or through community events, reaching out to others and seeing that if they're working on something I'm working on that's similar, hey, can we tag team and do a session together? That kind of stuff. Or, be out there and share, like you said before, share information. I've gotten opportunities I used to troll the forums in Citrix like all the time, my free time, and help people answer questions. And that's helped me out by connecting with others or getting opportunities because of that. So, look at those things and, yes, it's your time, but it's, costs nothing to help out others and to see if you can assist others. And like the others have said, mentor, look for someone to mentor you, mentor someone else. All those things help out. So that's the advice I'd have.
Right. Yeah. And
real quick, Todd's got to drop real quick.
Yeah.
So thank you, Todd. We'll get this out next week.
Absolutely.
So
right.
Thank you, Todd, for joining us.
Great working with you guys.
So, all right. So to wrap this up, I know Todd is dropping here, and we'd really like to thank him for joining us to share his experience with his career, and we'll have to get his link. We'll have to get his socials that he wants to share, any other resources for the show notes. So those will be included. But just to wrap this up, Jarian and Lee, also thank you for joining us today to talk about this. I think this is a really great topic, and I'm glad you are both, and Todd as well, were able to join to share your experiences. Just real quick before we go, where can we find you online? So, Jarian.
I'm pretty easy to find, LinkedIn, on the socials, whatever. Jarian Gibson, I'm out there. You can find me in the World of EUC Slack. I'm always there. I'm always online in some form or fashion there. So, feel free to reach out to me through different socials. I'm easy to find.
All right. Lee?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn. So yeah, come out and find me. I'm trying to post some stuff every couple of days on different things, whether it's AI or, kind of how companies should be thinking about their technology strategy. So come find me, come say hi.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today on this, the 73rd episode of Frontline Chatter. Before we go, I just want to remind everybody to subscribe to Frontline Chatter on wherever you get your podcasts, as well as join the World of EUC at worldofeuc.org. We have two big events coming up this year. The first is on April 29th. It's our Amplify virtual event. It's an online virtual conference. And then Amplify in person. And then Amplify in person, which is September 29th to October 1st in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Registration is open for both. And the Amplify in person early bird pricing ends on April 30th. We hope we can see all of you there, and we're looking forward to sharing all the great information we have about EUC. Jarian and I just got done talking with one of our potential keynote speakers today, and we think we have some really great stuff lined up for the event. So it's going to be an exciting event. We're making it bigger than last year, and we really hope to see you there. I want to also thank our sponsors for their continued support. Our founding partners are Tenzig, iGel, Liquidware, Omnissa, Nerdio, and Nutanix. We also have a channel founding sponsor in Choice Solutions. Our premier sponsors are Parallels. Our platinum sponsor is LeoStream. Our gold sponsor is Citrix, and our silver sponsor is Login VSI. So I want to extend a big thank you to all of our sponsors for helping make this podcast possible. Thank you again, Jarian, Lee, and Todd, for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And thank you to everybody who has joined us for this episode. Have a great one.
Thank you.